Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today I will be giving you my full card predictions and breakdown for UFC 310 live Saturday, December 7th from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into it, and we're going to go right ahead and jump into the very first fight, which is Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Brzeski, and a pretty big, interesting fight here at heavyweight. Kennedy Nzechukwu is coming off the very recent win over Chris Barnett, a pretty easy TKO win for him there. Chris Barnett actually hurt his knee jumping and celebrating right before the fight started to get himself kind of amped up, and he wound up tweaking his knee, and then he came out in the fight. The knee kind of gave out on him, and Kennedy was just able to TKO him. But that was going to be a bad matchup for Chris Barnett anyway, just because of the extreme size and length difference going on in that fight. Kennedy had so much range, just so much height on him, and Chris Barnett had been on the shelf for about 2 years at 38 years old, and he's not in the best shape, possible. So it was just going to be kind of a tough fight for him anyway, despite that injury. But looking over at Brzeski, nothing special about Lucas at all. He's been very much on the side of losing more than he has winning, and he is coming off a loss, a TKO loss to Mick Parkin. Before that, he had the win against the very underwhelming Walter Walker, who is the brother of Johnny Walker, and then before that, the knockout to Waldo Cortez Acosta, Carl Williams, and so on. And in this fight, I think this is a pretty easy fight. Kennedy Nzechukwu, he's had some hiccups here and there. I know he had the loss to Ovince St. Preux and then Dustin Jacoby, which kind of stopped a little bit of his momentum, but then he did get back on the track with that Chris Barnett win. And Kennedy is, he's still up and coming. He's still very talented. He's got a lot of length on him, 83-inch reach. He is 6'5", very tall. And with Kennedy, I think there's a lot of potential in the kid. I think he's just going to get better and better. And a heavyweight like Brzeski has a very low ceiling. He is not going to be the kind of heavyweight to ever break into the top 10. He's never going to be a top contender. He's just going to have that kind of low ceiling where a lot of mid-card guys and up-and-comers are just going to wind up beating him. And in this fight, I think Kennedy is just going to put the length. He's going to put some of that reach on him, and I think Kennedy is going to comfortably outstrike Brzeski. And, his chin doesn't hold up very well. He doesn't eat shots at all, very well. So I think Kennedy is going to put the hands, the length, the height on him, and I think Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to knock Brzeski out in the second round, possibly the first round, but I think it'll be a pretty easy fight for Kennedy, as long as he doesn't come in there making any poor IQ mistakes. He's on his game. He's sharp. He should comfortably outstrike Brzeski. So Kennedy Nzechukwu by second round KO is the pick. And moving on up to a very strange fight, we are looking at Clay, the Carpenter Guida, versus the up-and-coming streaking Chase Hooper. And this is a very, very odd fight here. Chase Hooper has looked very good recently. He has been picking up a lot of wins, picked up the crazy upset win over Yaroslav Borshev, which was just wild to see him kind of dominate him, because Borshev is a very solid fighter. He's got great stand-up, good pressure, great, combinations, man. He's tough to deal with, and Chase just kind of dominated him in that fight, hurt him, took him down, submitted him. So, it was a really impressive win by Chase Hooper. And then you look at the other side, Clay Guida. Clay Guida is an absolute legend. He's been in the UFC forever. I think he's been in the UFC for about 15 years. He's given us some amazing, just absolute junkyard dog fights. Clay's awesome. He's a fan favorite. But Clay Guida is 42 years old, and he is at the end of his career. He is coming off 2 losses from Joaquin Silva, and before that, Rafa Garcia. And, Clay Guida's starting to kind of hit that wall where it's like, man, the age is catching up to him. He's not as fast. He's not quite as durable as he used to be. And Clay Guida was never super dangerous. He was just a brawler. He was just a dog. He just chewed on you and put that pressure on you and beat you down. And, in this fight, I think this is a step back in competition for Chase Hooper. I honestly thought Chase Hooper would get a good step up from Borshev, someone closer to the top 10. But I guess they decided they wanted to keep Chase's momentum going, and they wanted to just kind of give him maybe just an easy win. Even though Borshev was easy, I think they kind of want to keep that momentum going for him. So they just said, let's just throw Clay Guida at him for a legend fight against an up-and-coming young buck, and let's see if the young buck can kind of take the torch from the old dog. And in this fight, I think this is a pretty damn easy fight for Chase Hooper. I think he's going to be too much on the feet. He's going to have such a height advantage on Clay Guida, 6'1" compared to Clay Guida's 5'7", and he's going to have a 4-inch reach. You know, Chase Hooper's striking is starting to come together. It's not fully quite there yet, but it's looking pretty good. But his jiu-jitsu is fantastic at his age, the young age of 25. And I think in this fight, Guida's going to come out doing his usual, you know, a lot of movement, a lot of pressure, a lot of just side to side coming at Chase. But I think Chase is going to be slick enough to hit him with all the proper shots, to outstrike him, even possibly hurt Guida. And I think he is going to drop Guida in this fight, stun him, get on top of him, mount him, and I think Chase Hooper is going to submit Clay Guida. I think this should be a pretty easy fight on the kid, unless, you know, Guida just comes out, puts a lot of pressure on Chase, and, you know, Chase kind of gets overwhelmed with it a little bit early, but I think Chase can kind of just sit in the pocket, find his range, kind of get around that pressure that Guida brings, and just pick him apart with the sharper, cleaner shots, hurt him, get on top of him, and submit him. If not, I think Chase Hooper will take a pretty easy 30-27 on Clay Guida. I mean, this is just kind of the end of the road for him, even though we all love Clay Guida. So Chase Hooper by submission round 2 is the official pick. And now we are up at Michael the Maverick Chiesa versus Max Payne Griffin. And this is a very interesting fight at welterweight. This is a very interesting matchup. They are both kind of similar styles, minus Max Griffin has like no jiu-jitsu. He's not a jiu-jitsu fighter. Michael Chiesa, his primary weapon is his jiu-jitsu, but he's got okay to decent stand-up, you know, nothing crazy there. And Michael Chiesa, you know, they're both in the same age range. Michael Chiesa's at 37 years old, Max Griffin at 39 years old, but Max Griffin is actually looking still pretty decent at his age. He's got good boxing, he's got good pressure, he comes forward, he's got good technique. And Michael Chiesa, on the other hand, you know, his stand-up is, it's all right. You know, he's kind of more of like a one-shot-at-a-time guy. Not a whole lot in the stand-up game. He is a little more on the edge of his jiu-jitsu just outshining his striking. But even then, you know, more recently, Chiesa's not looked super great. I mean, his last win was over a very aging, very declining, pretty much just in the dumpster at this point, Tony Ferguson. And before that, the loss to Kevin Holland, getting submitted by Kevin Holland, Sean Brady, and then Vicente Luque. So it's been rough for him. And Max Griffin has had a lot of split decisions, a lot of close fights. His last fight was against the very dangerous Jeremiah Wells, who has absolute cannon power in his hands. And before that, no knock on him at all. He took a loss to Michael Morales, but Michael Morales is an absolute killer. That kid is a problem right now in the division. He reminds me of a young Anthony Rumble Johnson. Rest in peace. We all loved Rumble Johnson. Michael Morales is a problem for anybody. So no knock on him to lose to a hot prospect like Michael Morales. Before that, the split decision against Tim the Dirty Bird Means, and then Neil Magny, the loss to him. But, you know, I think it's a very interesting fight on the feet. I think they're kind of similar in ways. But in this fight, I trust Max Griffin's boxing and his striking over Michael Chiesa's. And I think his pressure's still there. The hands are a little more technical. The combinations are a little better. And I think as long as this fight stays on the feet, Max Griffin's going to edge the striking. And I think he will kind of overwhelm Chiesa a little bit in the pocket, maybe up against the cage with the dirty boxing, with the shots at range, even in that pocket. And I think Max Griffin will pick up a decision win over Michael Chiesa. I think the boxing's just going to be a little better. I think Michael Chiesa is going to struggle with his ones and his twos. I don't see him getting Max Griffin down. I don't think he'll take a shot on him and get him to the ground. If he does, maybe he just sits on top of Max for a round. Max survives, and then he gets up, and then he just takes the 29-28 on the card, takes the other 2 rounds. But, you know, I think Max Griffin is just going to be the slightly better boxer in this fight, and he's going to have better movement, and he's going to get around the slightly stiffer Michael Chiesa. So we are going Max Payne Griffin by decision. I think it could be possibly a close fight, but I think Max is just going to edge the striking there. All right, and we are moving on up to Cody Durden versus Joshua Van, and this is such an interesting fight because I absolutely love Joshua Van. This kid is just phenomenal. His boxing at his age, 23 years old, he is literally one of the most impressive strikers in the company right now at his age. His boxing combinations are absolutely beautiful. He has fantastic combinations to the head. He rips the body like an absolute monster. He has fantastic body work. He goes upstairs, comes downstairs. I mean, he's just so overwhelming to, for these guys to try to deal with him. And even though he was on a streak, but he did take that loss to Charles Johnson and got caught kind of at the last second. I mean, Joshua Van is still such a problem. His speed, his pace, his hands, ripping to the head, ripping to the body, mixing it up, overwhelming the senses of his opponent. He's so good. And Cody Durden is a dog. He's just a dog, tough. He's got good wrestling. He's got okay stand-up, but he's more just tough than anything. And he sets a pace and puts a pressure on you. But I think in this fight, Joshua Van is just going to be so much better than Cody Durden. Joshua Van's hands are going to be levels above Cody Durden's. His pressure, his combinations, that boxing is going to be crazy. And I think he's just going to overwhelm Durden. I think Durden's going to kind of try to stay in the pocket with him and tough it out. But I think Joshua Van is just going to be too slick, too fast on the feet. And I think he's going to rip it to the head, rip it to the body, and just vice versa. And I think he is going to overwhelm Cody Durden with all that fantastic top-level striking that he's still developing, and I think Joshua Van picks up a 30-27 unanimous decision over Cody Durden. It could get scrappy at moments. Maybe Cody Durden shoots a takedown, maybe gets him down, but I don't really see that happening. I think the hands are going to keep Cody Durden at bay too much. He'll be too afraid to take a shot, and if he does, he won't be successful with it. Joshua Van will step out, circle around, and just start ripping him to pieces. So we are going Joshua Van by decision for the clean, unanimous 30-27 win there. All right, and we are moving on up to a rescheduled fight with Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders. And, I'm not going to go into a super big breakdown of this fight. I already did that in the previous breakdown for the last card. But in this fight, I think it can be an interesting close fight on the feet. Because Chris Weidman, to me, I'm not a Chris Weidman fan. I think he's very overrated. I've always thought he was overrated, and he has badly declined. His last win, poking Bruno Silva in the eyes and somehow getting the win was just ridiculous. Eryk Anders is not that good. He's kind of a plodding boxer, just kind of comes forward, throws a shot here and there, kind of makes it dirty, kind of shoots a takedown, kind of goes for double legs here and there. And it's not going to be a very exciting fight. It could kind of go either way. Weidman has a chance if Eryk Anders just stands there and does absolutely nothing in the fight. But I think in this fight, I think Anders can do just enough to take the win over Chris Weidman. I think he can kind of press forward, dirty box him, kind of plod on him. And I don't think Chris Weidman is going to have a whole lot to offer, and I'm just at a point where I'm not ever going to pick Chris Weidman. He's declined so badly, even though he has, picked up the Kelvin Gastelum win, and he picked up the win years ago against the Russian fighter. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. But, in this fight, I'm just going to stick to my original prediction from Stipe and John on that card, which was supposed to happen, even though Eryk Anders got hurt. He had to pull out of the fight, which was devastating for Chris Weidman. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Eryk Anders takes the decision over Chris Weidman. I think it's going to be a pretty boring and terrible fight, honestly. But, I think he'll do just enough to just kind of maybe stand in the pocket, throw a shot here and there, get, Chris backed up against the cage, kind of put a little bit of the hands on him, and maybe shoot it, try to go for an, under the stairs, grab his legs, pull him out, maybe get him down. But I think Eryk Anders is going to wind up taking the decision over Chris Weidman. It could be a close fight. Weidman could wind up getting it done, but we will stick with Eryk Anders by decision. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Randy Rude Boy Brown versus Brian the Butcher Battle, and this is a super, super interesting fight at welterweight. This is a fantastic matchup. I love this fight. And looking on the Randy Brown side, man, Randy Brown has just been looking so good. He's really sitting into a groove, getting on a streak here, picking up the great decision win over Eliza Zaleski dos Santos. Before that, knocking out Muslim Salikov with a nasty shot, and before that, picking up the decision over Wellington Turman. And Brian Battle, man, he's just been picking up steam. He's been looking really good. He did have the unfortunate eye poke loss to Angelusa, but that was a very questionable ending to that fight because Angelusa, if you go back and you look at the fight, he got poked, but he recovered, and the guy was totally fine. Pretending and acting like he couldn't see out of his eye. Oh, I can't see, I can't see. And then the minute the ref called the fight, he's totally fine, not touching the eye, looking right at Bryan Battle. He's completely fine. And then he's like, no, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fight. And it's like, dude, you know, you took the easy way out. You were getting outstruck. You pulled an Aljamain Sterling, you know, Oscar-winning performance, bullshit of the year. So it was not good. Bryan Battle was pissed at the end of the fight, you know, like, oh, now you're ready to fight now that the ref calls it off. So it didn't look good for Angelusa. He was getting beat anyway. And then Bryan Battle went on to fight Kevin Jousset, and he wound up getting the knockout in that fight. And I do think in this fight, I do think it's an interesting line here that Bryan Battle is the moderate favorite. I think this gap should be a little smaller. I think it should be a little more close to even because this is a very good fight. I mean, Randy Brown is, you know, he's got length, he's got good range, he's got good movement, he's slick, and Bryan Battle, you know, he's a dog. He comes forward, he puts the hands on you, his striking is massively improving, and I think it's a slightly closer fight. But in this fight, even though I went back and forth on it, and I can see a world where Randy Brown just uses the slicker range, the slicker, you know, striking from the outside, he's able to move, you know, and just kind of pick Bryan Battle apart. I think in this fight, I think it's going to be close up until they're in the pocket exchanging, and then Bryan Battle maybe catches him with a big shot. And we have seen Randy Brown knocked out before. He's been knocked out 2 or 3 times in the past. And you know, Vicente Luque knocked him out with a knee, and then some, you know, uppercuts, some hooks to the side of the head, pretty much down on the bottom of the cage. But in this fight, I think it's going to be very interesting, you know, just in the pocket, Bryan Battle coming forward, Randy Brown looking to use his jab, kind of stick and move to the outside, move around those shots of Bryan Battle. But I think at some point, Bryan Battle is going to catch Randy Brown with a big shot and most likely knock him out. And if that doesn't happen, I can see Bryan Battle just picking him apart, just kind of eventually getting around that length and that movement of Randy Brown and just finding his timing in the pocket. And, you know, Bryan Battle could wind up picking up that decision. But even though I do think the odds are I think they should be a little closer, I do see why Bryan Battle is the favorite. You know, he has the power. He's been looking real sharp in the pocket. And I'm going to say that even though I really, really see a path to Randy Brown still pulling this off because he's in his groove. He's finding his streak right now. I'm going to go ahead and say that Bryan Battle, in an exchange, catches Randy Brown with a shot, hurts him, drops him, and knocks him out. And if that doesn't happen and the fight extends past the second round, it could get really interesting. It could get very close. It could be a 29-28 split either way, because I think as long as Randy Brown doesn't get knocked out, he's very much in this fight. He's very much a problem with his movement, his jab, his ones and his twos. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Bryan Battle catches Randy Brown with a shot and knocks him out and continues his streak and moving on up the welterweight ladder. So even though I was very tempted to go possibly Randy Brown by decision with all the movement and the slickness on the outside, we will say Bryan Battle by second round KO is the prediction. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain, the Funkmaster Sterling, and a very, very interesting fight here at featherweight. You know, Aljamain Sterling coming off the win against Calvin Kattar back a few months ago, and Movsar Evloev has just been on a tear, an absolute Russian Terminator with the wrestling, picking up wins over Nick Lentz, Hakeem Dawodu, Dan Ige, Diego Lopez, and Arnold Allen, which was a very close fight. That fight was much closer than people realized. I mean, when you go back in that and watch that fight, there was almost a strong case to give Arnold Allen that win. You know, and then the illegal knees wound up happening. You know, Arnold had him hurt, was kneeing him in the head, but the hand was going up and down off the mat. You know, and now that rule is gone. You know, and it's unfortunate that that rule is gone now and didn't apply to this fight with Evloev and Arnold Allen, because if that rule had been erased in that fight, Arnold Allen pretty much wins that fight. So that was a pretty close fight, but Movsar still eked it out. He still got the job done. And in this fight, I think this is a pretty cut and dry. This is going to be a grappling fest. You know, there might be a little bit of, a little bit of this takes place on the feet, but I think this is going to be a battle of grapplers, and I think Movsar, he is just, nobody's going to stop those takedowns right now, that pressure right now, that technique in his grappling right now. And even though Aljamain's a very solid grappler, and that's his bread and butter, his jiu-jitsu, his grappling is where he gives guys problems, I think Movsar Evloev is just better in those areas. And I think Movsar will out-edge Aljamain Sterling in the grappling, and I think he picks up a 30-27 decision on the cards. And it should be pretty easy. Like, Aljamain might give him some little fits here and there, and make it a little bit competitive, but I think Evloev is just going to be too much with the pace, the pressure, getting Aljamain up against the cage, holding him on the cage, getting him down, controlling him. And even if he somehow cannot get Aljamain down, cleanly and consistently in this fight, I think he'll just, he'll hold him on the cage, he'll be able to control him, he'll win the clinch battles, and I think it'll be a pretty decent and solid performance by Evloev to pick up this win. So we are going Movsar Evloev by decision. All right. And we are moving on up to Vicente, the silent assassin Luque versus Themba Gorimbo. And this is a super, super interesting fight here. I love this fight. I'm a big Vicente Luque fan. I have been for many years. I think at least at one point, he was one of the most well-rounded fighters in the UFC. He had fantastic boxing, absolute cannon power in his hands, and he had some of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu we have ever seen. He could mix it up so well. He could knock you out on the feet. He could take you down and submit you. I mean, he was such a well-rounded problem. But the unfortunate thing with Vicente Luque is that recently he's just been struggling. He's been hitting a wall, and it's been very hard to watch him just kind of decline like this. Like, he's had so much potential, and back a few years ago, he was an absolute killer. He was one of the biggest dark horses in the division, and one of the biggest problems to have to fight because he was just so well-rounded, and it looked like at one point he was actually going to have championship contender potential. But then he wound up taking the loss to Bilal Muhammad in the rematch. And then after that, he had the very scary fight with Jeff Neal, where in that fight, he took a lot of damage and he wound up actually developing a brain bleed after that. So it was looking very, very scary for Vicente Luque, and it almost looked like maybe he won't fight ever again. It was very uncertain if he would come back from that. And he did. He recovered from the brain bleed. The doctors gave him the okay to return, and it was kind of like, ooh, how's he going to look now? And you didn't want to see him take any more damage, because if he takes any more damage and that brain bleed comes back, that's pretty much a wrap on his career. There's no way you can continue fighting after that. But after that, he did pick up the win over a aging and declining Rafael dos Anjos, but then turned right back around and got absolutely steamrolled by Joaquin Buckley. And Buckley's just on a tear right now. He's tough to deal with anybody. But then originally in this fight, Vicente Luque was supposed to fight Nick Diaz. And if that fight were still taking place, I think Vicente Luque wins that fight all day. Nick Diaz is just, for him to even make a comeback right now is just ridiculous. Nick Diaz is 41 years old. I mean, badly declining, looked awful against Robbie Lawler in the rematch. I mean, looked like he had no business being in there. And I think even a declining Vicente Luque would have steamrolled Nick Diaz. But Nick Diaz pulled out of that fight, and now it's Themba Gorimbo. And I've gone back and forth on this fight because Themba Gorimbo has been looking very good. He's young, he's streaking, he's up and coming, picking up against the win against Nico Price, Ramis Brahima, and then Pete Rodriguez, and he's been looking very solid. And even though I've gone back and forth because this is such a step up in competition for Themba Gorimbo, this is a big step up. Even though Vicente is struggling and he's declining a bit, this is a big fight for him. This is a massive jump to go from Nico Price to Vicente Luque. And if this fight was taking place 2 or 3 years ago, I would be picking Vicente Luque all day. All day. I would think Vicente Luque steamrolls Themba Gorimbo, because Vicente Luque 2 to 3 years ago was an absolute problem, an absolute killer. But now that he's struggling and it seems like he's kind of declining a bit, I think there's more of a chance for Themba Gorimbo to pull this win off. And, I still see a path for Vicente Luque. He could come out, he could crack Themba with a big shot, get him down, wind up submitting him, and just looking better than ever. That's still a possibility. I don't think Vicente Luque's completely done yet. But I think Themba is just going to be a little too much on the feet. The striking is going to be, fully there to kind of overwhelm Luque. And if Luque does not come into this fight at his absolute best, then Themba is just going to just outstrike him on the feet and just outpace him on the feet. And I want to be wrong, because I would love to see Vicente Luque pick up a solid, much-needed win and get back on track. But I'm looking at it and going, what version of Luque is going to show up? Is he going to, come in sparked again, as that killer that he was 2 or 3 years ago and just steamroll Themba? Or is he going to come in and just look hesitant and slow and not sure of himself from the, the brain bleed and the things that he went through? But I'm going to go ahead in this fight, and even though it pains me, I'm going to say that Themba Gorimbo picks up the decision over Vicente Luque. I'm just a little too worried that Vicente will come in looking slow, looking hesitant, not confident in his hands, not confident in his grappling, and Themba will just outdog him for 3 rounds and most likely pick up a 30-27 unanimous, at the very least a 29-28. So even though I love Vicente Luque, I'm going to go Themba Gorimbo by decision. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Anthony Lionheart Smith versus Dominic Reyes. And this is such an interesting fight here. I'm actually very excited about this fight because Dominic Reyes, man, has had one of the most heartbreaking downfalls in UFC history. He makes it to the title, does all this fantastic work, makes it to Jon Jones, and the judges absolutely screw him. One of the most atrocious screwovers in UFC history, absolutely in UFC title fight history. Dominic Reyes 100% won that fight, 48-47, 3-2 on the cards, and they screwed him. And it was like from the moment that he got screwed in the Jon Jones fight, it just absolutely cursed him. He went on this insane losing streak. He was getting knocked out left and right, and it was just so heartbreaking to see Dominic Reyes go from should have been champion, should have beat the greatest of all time, should have been on top, to just falling off a cliff and getting knocked out left and right. And it was really just at a point, it's like, man, this might be the end of Dominic Reyes. I think he's going to get, he's going to get continued to get knocked out, and then the UFC is just going to cut him. And it's like, man, that's his story. What he should have done to Jon Jones, what he should have been. And now he's just on this massive knockout loss streak, and he's getting cut from the company. And right when it was looking really scary, and this is do or die for him, he comes in and picks up the insane KO of Dustin Jacoby, and everybody's just like, holy shit, this was amazing. He gets back on track. He saves his career. He looks great in the fight. And that's hard for fighters that get knocked out multiple times in a row to come back and actually pick up a massive KO win and look so good. That doesn't happen a whole lot. And then you look over at Anthony Smith, and Anthony Smith is just, his nickname's Lionheart, but you don't see any heart in the cage from him. I mean, Anthony Smith comes in and he just looks underwhelming so many times. He just, his IQ is just so poor in the cage. His striking is not there. His heart to just press forward and try to take a win from a guy is just not there. And Anthony Smith is just so up and down all the time. You can never trust him. And he's coming off the very underwhelming loss to Roman Dolidze. He looked awful in that fight. Before that, he beat Vitor Petrino. Vitor Petrino was very heavily favored to just steamroll him and KO him in that fight. And Anthony Smith wound up pulling off the crazy upset submission. He good job, props to you for picking up that submission. But if he doesn't get that submission, Vitor Petrino is eventually finding that knockout. So, solid win from Smith there. But man, like pretty lucky to get that submission, because that was not going to turn out for him well if he didn't. And then before that, the loss to Khalil Roundtree, just getting smashed on the feet, rocked and wobbled and dropped. And in this fight, man, even though it's an interesting fight, and I think this fight, if this was happening a few years ago, could be real close and real competitive when Anthony Smith was actually doing well and doing pretty decent. But in this fight, man, I am looking at this going, I think this is going to be Dominic Reyes' big comeback party. I think this is where he picks up a second win. He actually gets another KO here, and we start to see the resurgence of Dominic Reyes, because that confidence that he's going to have from knocking out Dustin Jacoby is going to do the world. It's going to do worlds for him. It's going to do so much for the confidence, for the building of his comeback. And I think Dominic Reyes in this fight, as long as he comes in looking sharp, looking hungry, has that confidence behind him, I think he can knock Anthony Smith out. And I'm going to bank that this is going to be where we just see, Dominic Reyes, after all the brutal knockouts he's had, all those brutal knockout losses, to Ryan Spann and so many others. I think Dominic Reyes can get around the slower, declining Anthony Smith and just put him out. And then we start to just get that resurgence for Dominic Reyes. And maybe there's title dreams, secondary title dreams down the road for him. Maybe he comes back and has this crazy Jim Miller run where the second half of his career is just even better than the first. Who knows? But I'm going to say Dominic Reyes picks up this win by KO. Him and Anthony Smith are exchanging on the feet. Reyes is just sharper, faster, cutting angles, cracks Anthony, hurts him, drops him, TKOs him. So we are going Dominic the Dominator Reyes by first round KO. All right, and moving on to the next fight, we are looking at Nate Landwehr versus Doo Ho Choi, and oh boy, this fight is just, it's driving me insane because I cannot stand Nate Landwehr. I think the guy is one of the most obnoxious, just assholes to ever step in the cage. Everything about his personality pisses me off. The way he talks, the trash he talks, the way he acts, he is just deplorable to me. And he's the kind of guy I want to see get knocked out all the time because he's just, I'm Nate the Train, baby. What's up? Suck my dick. What's up? I'm so good. And all this, and he's just cringe. Everything about the guy is just cringe, and I cannot stand it. But at the end of the day, he's a dog, and if you can't finish him, he's gonna wind up coming back and just putting it on you. He's gonna wind up coming back and TKOing you, and I hate that about him. I wish he wasn't that kind of fighter to where he's just, if you don't put him away early, he's gonna come back. And Doo Ho Choi, on the other hand, man, back a few years ago, he was looking like the next big thing. He was looking like the next hot prospect. His hands looked amazing. Sniper power in his hands. He looked so impressive. And then Doo Ho just fell off a cliff. I mean, the kid wound up losing to Cub Swanson, Jeremy Stevens, Charles Jourdain, and then the Kyle Nelson decision majority. And then he comes back against Bill Algeo and actually looks pretty damn good. It was competitive for a minute, and then he caught Bill Algeo with a nasty left hook and dropped him and got a much-needed win. So a little bit of a spark, a little bit of resurgence for Doo Ho. I mean, after a few years of getting knocked out, and he was on the shelf for a very long time, which didn't help him. I think he was in the Korean military, and he got pretty much pulled and taken over there for that. But once he came back, and he found his groove in this Bill Algeo fight, it was looking pretty good for him. So in this fight, I'm looking at it like Doo Ho has so much potential to hurt Nate Landwehr early and possibly knock him out, and that's a classic Nate Landwehr fight where he gets hurt. He always gets hurt and tagged early, but then he comes back. And I'm looking at it going, Doo Ho is live for that knockout, that early KO. But if he cannot knock Nate out early, Nate, unfortunately, I feel, is going to come back. He's going to put the pressure on him. He's going to put the dog on him. And Nate is going to wind up TKOing Doo Ho. And I hate to say it. I don't want to pick the guy. I want him to lose. But I just don't fully trust that Doo Ho is going to be able to put enough hard shots on him early to hurt him that badly and KO him out clean and just shut that problem down. So I think in this fight, Doo Ho is going to put the hands on him early, probably hurt him, but then I think Nate Landwehr is just going to wind up coming back, out-dogging him, and TKOing him, and I hate to say it. So we are going Nate Landwehr by second round TKO against Doo Ho Choi, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope Doo Ho puts him out cold early. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell versus Kron Gracie, and a super odd fight here. Like, Kron Gracie has been on the shelf for I think like a year or two now. Let's see, his last fight was, when was that? A year and 6 months, so a year and a half. And, Bryce Mitchell coming off the nasty knockout against Josh Emmett. I mean, one of the nastiest knockouts of all time. Literally, Bryce Mitchell was on the ground just twitching, convulsing. It looked really scary for him, and he ate one of the most nasty right hands you could ever eat. I mean, pretty much leaned right into it. So, Bryce Mitchell is coming off a vicious knockout loss. But before that, Bryce Mitchell was doing pretty well. Had the win against Dan Ige, did lose to the current champ, Ilia Topuria. Then Edson Barbosa picking up that win, and Andre Fili. So Bryce Mitchell still has a ton of potential, and I think he will absolutely recover from the Josh Emmett knockout. And I think he does pick up this win against Kron Gracie here, and Kron Gracie is just like, if you look at recent photos of him, he looks like he's been living under a bridge for the last year. He looks like a homeless dude, and you're like, Jesus, man, like, you all right? You doing all right in life? Like, he just doesn't look good. And the fact that he's been on the shelf for so long, and then coming off 2 losses, I think this is going to wind up turning into a grappling fight. I think Bryce Mitchell will even come out and look a little, look decent on the feet, outstrike him on the feet, and then Bryce Mitchell will just eventually get him in the clinch, hold him against the cage, and get him down and just kind of sit on top of him. And I don't think, even though Kron Gracie is known for his jiu-jitsu and that's his bread and butter, I think Bryce Mitchell is just going to be the better wrestler, the better grappler, and I think he will recover from this vicious Josh Emmett KO and kind of get back on track. And I just don't see Kron Gracie offering him much in this fight. So we are going to go Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell by unanimous 30-27 decision. All right, and moving on up, we are looking at Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov. And this is such an interesting fight at heavyweight. One of the best heavyweight fights we could have this year. And in this fight, even though it's an extremely interesting fight here stat-wise, I mean, Alexander Volkov has just been finding his groove lately. He has been picking up a lot of wins, finally settling into his long frame and all that height and all that reach that he has, and he's just been looking so good. And what's so crazy is that he is 6'7", and he has the reach disadvantage to Ciryl Gane. Like, it's wild. Ciryl Gane's a big guy at 6'4", but Ciryl Gane actually has the reach advantage over Alexander Volkov, and Volkov has 4 inches of height on him. It's crazy. So in this fight, Ciryl Gane has been looking really solid. I mean, the win over Sergey Spivak, unfortunately, he did have the quick loss to John Jones. Did not look good in that fight. Got taken down, got caught in the front headlock, guillotine, and got tapped very quickly. And before that, he had the win against Tai Tuivasa, the absolute brutal beatdown. So even though he's had that loss against John Jones, Ciryl Gane is still one of the best kickboxers in the division. He's still fantastic on the feet. But Alexander Volkov has just been steamrolling guys. Sergey Pavlovich looking great in that fight. The submission Ezekiel choke against Tai Tuivasa. Before that, the KO punch against Alexander Romanov. And, it's been looking fantastic for him. And even though it's a very interesting fight style-wise on the feet, and I can see Alexander Volkov using, just all of his height, all of the, his length, to kind of stay on the outside and kind of give Ciryl some problems, I think this fight is going to come down to speed. I think Ciryl is just the slicker, faster striker. He's got better combinations. He's not kind of just one at a time like Volkov tends to be. He's not as stiff as Volkov. And, Ciryl Gane just moves. He flows very well. And I think that's where he can start to give Alexander Volkov problems in this fight, just his movement alone and his combination flow. So even though I think there's a very good potential for Alexander Volkov to just, use all his height and some of that, a little bit of that range, even though he's at a slight range disadvantage, I think, he could still just pop shots out there, touch Ciryl Gane up and make it competitive. But I think Ciryl Gane is just going to be the faster, more fluid striker. He's going to be quicker. He's going to be throwing body kicks. He's going to be throwing combinations. And I think he will outstrike Alexander Volkov in this fight and pick up I'm going to say a 29-28 unanimous. I think Volkov could actually maybe take a round, make it a little close, just with just the height and just the size and that jab. But I'm going to say Ciryl Gane is just going to be the more fluid, the quicker, just the more relaxed striker out there, and I think he edges Alexander Volkov in this fight. So we are going Ciryl Gane by decision in this fight. All right, and we are moving on up to the co-main event of the card, and I absolutely cannot wait for this. We have Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian the Future Garry. And this is a super interesting fight. I mean, because Ian Garry, even though he is the most cringe fighter on the roster, I can't stand him. No one can stand him. He has the most unlikable personality. The trash he talks, the things that he says, trying to be a dollar store ripoff Conor McGregor. The whole situation with him and his wife, that whole circus. I mean, everything about the guy is cringe. just unlikable, and you want to see him lose so bad. But at the end of the day, Ian Garry is very talented. He is very good. His striking is excellent. His movement is excellent. His in and out, his flow. He's very, very hard to deal with. And he is going to beat a lot of guys in the division, and he has. You know, he picked up the not super impressive win over against Michael Venom Page, but he got the job done. I did predict he would beat Michael Page in that fight, and he did. And then before that, the very pretty close fight against Jeff Neal. And then back when he fought Kenan Song, we actually saw him get caught with a shot and dropped bad. You know, so Ian Garry has been hitting fights. He has been hurting fights. He's had moments where you're like, oh boy, like, he's getting touched here and he's getting hurt. So we know he can be cracked. We know he can be hurt. And for all that talent, there's still some holes there, when he gets in the pocket with guys. And then you look at Shavkat Rakhmonov, and the guy has just been an absolute killer. Bursted onto the scene a few years ago, fighting, Michel Prazeres, then after that, Carlston Harris with the spinning hook kick, TKO on the ground. Then the submission win over Neil Magny, the submission win over Jeff Neal, the standing bulldog choke, almost rear naked choke, and then the submission win over Stephen Thompson. And Shavkat has just looked absolutely incredible. He has been such a problem, just steamrolling guys with his submissions, his striking, and he's just a Terminator. He is so hard to deal with, and he has a 100% finish rate. All of his 18 wins have a finish behind them. He has no decision wins on his record at all. And that says so much for a guy. That is incredibly impressive, incredibly hard to do, to finish all 18 of your fights and be such a killer like that. And in this fight, even though I think it's such an interesting fight, and I think Ian Garry will be his toughest fight yet, because Ian Garry's movement, his in and out, his slickness, his striking in the pocket, just able to get in, get out, pick you apart with his jabs, his ones and his twos. I think it's a very interesting back and forth kind of fight. But in this fight, I am looking at Shavkat, and I just cannot pick against the guy. He's so good. He is just so good with his submissions, his jiu-jitsu, finding that shot to hurt you, finding that shot to put you in trouble. And I think Ian Garry at some point is going to be in and out of the pocket, doing a lot of bouncing, doing a lot of movement. But I think at some point, Shavkat is going to put that pressure on him. Shavkat's going to get in his face. He's going to be able to cut him off. And I think he is going to catch Ian Garry with a shot. I think he hurts Ian Garry, drops him, and I think Shavkat is going to get on his back and pull off the rear naked choke. If not, he'll pull off a guillotine. He will find a way to hurt Ian Garry in a pocket exchange while he's trying to zip in, try to step out. Shavkat cracks him, hurts him, and he is going to follow Ian Garry to the ground, and I think he gets this submission, because even though I could see a path where Ian Garry just stays on the outside, picks his shots, that beautiful movement, that in and out, and maybe he lightly picks Shavkat apart and beats Shavkat on the cards, and, he just looks good on the feet. I think Shavkat is just, I'm not going to pick against the guy. He's just a Terminator. 18 finishes, 18 fights. It's incredibly impressive, and I think he will hurt Ian Garry like Song Kenan did, and I think he will wind up finding that submission on him. So we are going to go Shavkat Rakhmonov to stay undefeated and move to 19-0 and to stop the hype train of Ian Garry, which we're all hoping happens. We all want to see the kid lose. Nobody wants to see the kid win anymore, even though he's very good at it and he's been very impressive lately. So Shavkat Rakhmonov is the pick by submission in the second round. All right, and moving on up to the main event of the evening, we are looking at Alexandre Pantoja versus the debuting Kai Asakura, and a very interesting fight here. Kai Asakura coming over from Ryzen. He was a former bantamweight champion over in Ryzen, had a very impressive record over there, a lot of wins. Now, I have never seen Kai Asakura fight live. I didn't have any clue who he was when they announced this fight back weeks ago. I was like, who is this guy? And then I went and I watched tape on him, and I watched a lot of highlights of him, and the kid is very impressive, very impressive. He's very fast, very sharp striking, very sharp boxing, and just steamrolling guys. He puts on just a blistering, just storm of shots on people. Just cracking guys, dropping them, hurting them. And the kid is looking very impressive. But the one thing that I noticed on the kid's record is that he has never been 5 rounds before. You know, he's a blitz, he's a storm, he's a tsunami early, but he's never been into full championship rounds. So even though he's a problem for a lot of guys and was a problem for a lot of guys in Ryzen within 3 rounds, he is jumping over to the UFC to a top level champion. I mean, jumping from that promotion to a top champion in Alexandre Pantoja, who is one of the best fighters in the company. And Alexandre Pantoja is incredibly well-rounded, and he has a ton of 5-round championship experience. You know, and Alexandre Pantoja is great on the feet. He's great on the ground, even better on the ground. Great jiu-jitsu, great grappling, great control on the ground. And we've seen Alexandre Pantoja survive storms before. And I'm pretty sure Alexandre Pantoja has never been KO'd. I'm 99% certain he's never been KO'd. So he has survived storms. He has survived elite level striking, and he has just gotten through that storm, and he has been able to take guys down. He has been able to control guys. He's been able to just handle guys on the ground. And in this fight, I think, you know, even though Kai Asakura has looked very impressive from the tape I've watched, and he's just an absolute just blitz, he's a storm to start, and has great striking, and has great hands, and has fantastic power, and he's very quick. I think this is going to be too much too soon for this kid. I think jumping into a top-level championship fight with someone like Alexandre Pantoja, who can survive your storm and drag you into deep waters and take you down and control you, I think that's a problem for Kai, and that's what I think is going to happen in this fight. I think the first 2 rounds is going to be very interesting. I think it's going to be, you know, Alexandre Pantoja is going to have to deal with that blitz, deal with that pressure, that sharp striking, those sniper shots and all that power. But I think Alexandre Pantoja will survive it. I think he'll get around it. And then by the time, if it makes it there, by the time we start to hit that 3rd round and Pantoja starts to get underneath him, these wild shots, all this pressure, all this volume, Pantoja will get under those shots, take him down, control him, drain that gas tank, and I think Alexandre Pantoja will stop the debuting Kai Asakura and pick up a decision over the former Ryzen bantamweight champion, and I think it's just too much too soon, getting just thrown right into the deep end. Even though he was a champion in his division, we probably needed to see somebody a little bit of a step down from Pantoja just to see where he's at. Can you fight and beat the top level, top 10 competition before you get to the champion? But since he has not had any test before he made it to Alexandre Pantoja, I think that could be a detriment to him, and it's going to be too much too soon. And all of that championship level, all that 5-round level, all that fantastic veteran experience that Pantoja has had is just going to be too much for the kid, and he will get around the blitz storm of strikes and volume and speed, take him down, control him, and pick up the decision win. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for my predictions. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you saw here, please subscribe, and we will see you for our predictions for UFC 311. Take care.